Hello. Hey, Krista, how are you? Oh, you're muted, but you're driving, so I don't want you to don't you worry about both. You can just listen. I'm sure there will be a few more folks, so I'm just getting some materials together for the live, but I hope you're doing well today. It's a nice, beautiful day out where I am. So let's see, what else did I want to talk about today? There's that, and then marketing, oh, handbook, shelter of plant stuff, training resources. Okay. Oh, these look nicer. I'll use these. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just gonna wait a couple more minutes before I get going, but in the meantime, I'll just, I guess, chitter chatter. It's been beautiful here the last few days in Vermont, almost feeling like fall, and I'm definitely loving it because it was very hot prior to that. And I've been really busy today my working on the playgroup mentorship course because I'm just finishing up some final touches for the videos that are going to be released tomorrow, but tonight's our first live mentorship, which is going to be really exciting. So Chris, I hope you can join us. And I think our next session is when you said you may be interested. So all right, we've got somebody else coming on in. Rebecca's here. Awesome. Let me get to my script so I can remember what I'm supposed to be talking about. So excited to see you today. Hi, Rebecca. Good to see you.
Oh, hi. Yeah, good to see you too. Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully, a couple more people will join, but today's focus is going to be talking about building resilient behavior programs and teams in our shelter. So I'm pretty excited to kind of get into this topic because it's one of my favorites. Let me see if I can make sure my recording is recording properly. And awesome. Okay. All right, so welcome today to the live. It's been a few weeks since I've been able to host one. And the last one I was like at 45 minutes late too because I got distracted by what I was working on and I had turned all my notifications off to get into deep work mode and then I just completely lost track of time. But I'm very excited to be here today talking about resilient behavior programs for I know that both of you have been here before, but for those of you might be joining later or might be watching the recording. My name is Laurie Lawless, and I run Shelter Behavior Integrations. And my whole mission is to help uh, operationalize and make our difficult shelter work more efficient because there is never enough time in the day to get everything done. And so, what I wanted to focus on today was really talking about what we're trying to accomplish in our behavior programs, how we can save time and energy with a little bit of planning, and if we can help standardize things across the board, we can actually make some really great progress with our dogs, even if we may not necessarily have a full-on behavior team or all the time in the day to go through educational training and all of that. So I think I wanted to start a little bit today with what helps make a behavior team, behavior program sustainable. Oftentimes, when I go to shelters, people have started programs and they worked for about 6 months and they kind of tapered off. We have one person putting in a lot of work and not a lot of people with buy-in. And so when we are thinking about implementing something operationally, the first thing that we need to think about is what kind of changes we're asking the staff and or volunteers to make and what is otherwise their current daily routine and if that's going to compete with other things that they're used to doing. So, when I'm working on helping shelters implement strategies, instead of creating a whole program and introducing it simultaneously, we like to start from a ground level of what small changes can we make to allow staff and volunteers to get their feet wet a little bit before diving head first. The whole goal of and the whole goal is, of course, to benefit the dogs, and to help move dogs, especially more challenging dogs, through the shelter. And if we're able to identify dogs who have those behavioral challenges by asking our staff to begin with just doing some documentation, that's going to be really our first step. So whether that's something that we keep on the kennel as far as observing their time out with the dogs, their one-on-one time with the dogs, if we as the management or leadership team are just getting people to understand the basics of observing dog behavior and documenting it in objective language, that's going to be really one of the first things that I usually try to implement. Now, if your team doesn't necessarily have all of those skills built up in their repertoire yet, we might want to provide some type of observation form that fills in the data for them. So rather than them having to write things out on in like a paragraph format, we might ask them to circle certain keywords or choose specific sentences that can kind of fluff and give us an idea of what they're visualizing. What I've really fallen into recently is actually using the fear, anxiety, and stress scoring chart from fear-free shelters. And yes, that does take a little bit of, that does take onboarding for staff. But if you can utilize that program to at least get everybody in the shelter utilizing the same lingo and understanding visually what behaviors are falling into the 1 through 5 category or 0 through 5 category, that can be really helpful because if we're using something like an observational data sheet, whether that's on a whiteboard at the end of the kennel or if we have sheets on individual kennels, if we're asking when you were observing the dog in this context, what was their overall FAS score, instead of them having to write out when I witnessed the dog when I walked into the kennel and I went to take the dog out of the kennel, their tail was tucked and their eyes were wide. We can just say they were at a specific FAS score. I think that's number 3. And so that's going to not only give us an idea of, what that animal may or may not have looked like when the employee or volunteer was approaching them, but it's also going to give us a number to help us start tracking, because if we are getting numbers in that are saying, one person takes the dog out and they're at an FAS of 1, and another person takes the dog out and they're at an FAS of 3, or it's something worse, and it's varying between people. We may want to dig into that a little bit further to notify and figure out what are the different contingencies that these people are approaching this specific dog. And we're learning that that dog may be very sensitive to different handlers for different reasons. Whereas if we have a dog who's giving us a consistent FAS score, that's going to be a lot easier for us. So if we start tracking that data, we want to then start using the lingo when we're working with the staff, or if we go to prompt and ask more questions about an animal's behavior, we can say, hey, I noticed this morning when you went to go take Jojo out, their FAS score was pretty high. Can you then tell me a little bit more about that? And then you can pull more details from that. I have found that if you're asking people to do too much documentation during the daytime, when especially our kennel techs or animal care teams are working, trying to get all the tasks they have to get done for the day, asking them to stop and write things down often leads to them not doing it, because they're either going to wait until the end of their shift or their end of their block or whatever it is to write things down. So we may miss some important details. They may forget to do it completely. If we're asking people to, if they are not allowed to use their phones, or we're not using technology and it has to be in a written documented format, that can be really challenging. So figuring out the best way to get the staff understanding objective data observations and prompting with some observational sheets. So I did pull one up. I have one here. I wanted to show you guys. Let me see if I can, where is my in shelter care list? So let's see, that one's not it. Tracking sheets, here it is. Okay, so let me just share this with you guys really quickly. Do. So this is like an example of a I'm just going to put it over on the screen. You're going to see me looking left. So this is one that a shelter had put together that goes on an individual animal's kennel for the first week they're in the shelter to help collect information about that dog's behavior towards the handlers when they're taking them out. So we've got the caretaker observations. In this shelter, they've instead of using the FIS scores, they've used social, passive, avoidant, or reactive and then any objective observation notes. And they want to gather that data not only through observation, but how is the animal while they're being handled, their rotation and movement, and enrichment and resources. So, again, it's another way to just kind of grab a quick snapshot. And what's really helpful about this, oh, you guys don't need to see, well, I have more stuff to show you in a little bit. What's helpful about this is it's many times when staff are working with the dogs and we don't have a really good way to communicate information from staff to management teams and then decisions are being made about animals, they're feeling like maybe their voice isn't being heard, they're feeling as though they can't help the animal, they're not given the idea on how to do it. And so just getting a communication chain between the staff and the management is really important because once they understand that their voice is being heard, now we can start to empower them with some tools on how to make changes and help change the animal's behavior. More and more our animal care staff that are coming in are very technology savvy and they can learn things in a lot of really cool snippets. So then what I like to do is start with handling plans. So this may not be something where we're doing actual behavior modification necessarily, but we're thinking about what small things can we do intermittently throughout the day that's going to help improve this animal who's experiencing challenges get better or at least stay the same, right? We not a dog not deteriorating in the shelter is still better than getting them teaching them new things, for some shelters I walk into where we don't necessarily have behavior teams on staff or behavior folks on staff. It's more about just teaching the staff what we can do to make changes to help those animals feel better on a daily basis. And that comes along with identifying what the challenges are for the dog and then also figuring out what type of handling would help reduce stress for this animal. So then we can start teaching based on those FAS scores or with teaching body language. And now they're documenting observations and they're learning how that works. Now, as we work towards our next step into the program, we're having the staff begin to think about how can I adjust myself to reduce stress for the animal. And so, let's see. Oh, did I just close out? Oh my gosh, you guys, I just like closed out of everything I had open. Oh no, here it is. It's right here. And so once we start working on teaching them that, we want to maybe talk about low stress handling. We can talk about consent petting. We can talk about treat delivery and how to do those things. We can then start to put together basic behavior plans. I start with three different categories of dogs, and as your staff becomes more advanced, you can, of course, add on more. But our three big ones that we see in the shelter are going to be our high arousal and jumpy mouthy dogs. We're going to have our really fearful dogs who are scared. And are shying away from people or might be in the corner growling. And then we also will have dogs who are reactive. Now, of course, we know that reactivity can be from fear, it can be from frustration. So the reactivity type stuff uh, you might have extra little caveats in there, but in general, when we have a reactive dog, we're typically treating the outward behavior the same way. It's just kind of the function of why it's happening is a little different. So I wanted to show you an example of a really simple plan that if you're lucky enough to use Shelter Love, they do have some pretty cool features in their system that allows you to make make plans and then you can kind of select in there exactly what you want to see. But if not, you can still make it. And another option that I've started using actually quite a bit is Slack is another great tool because you can create forms in Slack and and you can have multiple choice options and fill it out, and then it will generate a Word doc with all of the output of that information. So you don't have to sit and rewrite a training plan every single time, and you can keep the language nice and consistent. So, but for today's example, I wanted to just show you an output of one of the Shelter Love training templates that I helped put together for a shelter that I was working with. So in this training plan, I'll blow it up just a little bit so you can see it. We've got this dog named Julius, and he was a very high arousal dog. Lots of energy, hound dog, baying all the time. When you would get him out of the kennel, he was very jumpy mouthy. And so this was an example of what we called in this shelter uh, a 10 a.m. activity plan. So their morning cleaning typically ended around 10 o'clock. And then for dogs who were having a little bit more difficulty in the shelter, we started designating activity plans. So this was instead of incorporating necessarily a behavior modification plan, we were thinking about without a team. Obviously, we didn't have any behavior staff there at the time, but I'm happy to say the shelter now does have some uh is with so with Julius, what we did with the staff is say this is their activity plan so we can help reduce their arousal, reduce his frustration, and get him some exercise and outlets. So for his 10 a.m. activity, we decided to do nose work for some days where instead of him coming out and just throwing himself all over the place. They would prep the yard with some nose work and get him out there. And they had some stored instructions in here. So if you're able to start asking Julius to sit or give eye contact at gate before letting him in. If he was in a play group scenario, we were asking to intervene a few times during the play using a leash. So that way we could help teach him to stop pummeling the other dogs. And so what they would do is they would just pull him out and ask him to sit and do a couple sits and treats and calm him down before releasing him back into play. So what this was doing was allowing us some time to build in some relaxation. And then the nose work was a really great decompression activity, especially after play group. So after he got his energy out, he could go and do some decompression before going back to his kennel. So for Julius, of a dog who was very, oh my gosh, you guys don't have the plan in front of you. I pulled it out of the share screen. I'm so sorry. Me and two screens. So yeah, so you can see here that this was a very specific plan for him. It was located both in the computer and it would be posted on a board that we had created. So the 10 a.m. plan, so for Julius, this was his, and usually, so this shelter had about I want to say up to 25-ish dogs at a time, and maybe only 3 to 4 staff members on in the morning for dogs. Usually, actually, that was the whole staff, and dogs would have 2 to 3. Once cleaning was done, they could kind of rotate staff back and forth, but this gave the staff intention on what they can do to help the dogs. And as they were practicing behaviors like very basically sit down, those types of things, what they're doing in those times is they're starting to work on their timing and reinforcement strategies while working with individual dogs. So an additional, actually, this is once once the staff got a little better at working on some of those things. This is actually still Julius. He was there for quite some time. Um, we incorporated a jumpy mouthy plan. So what's, like I said, great about having these pre-planned templates in something like Shelter Love, or like I said, you could create it in Slack. You could potentially even use maybe oh, what's another one? Airtable allows you to do this, and there's some Microsoft Office tools that can, is it allows you to create a form and then you reuse it and you just add in multiple choices. So when you go to put a plan together for Julius, for example, so you can put in various goals. So for him, it was reducing excitement and increasing impulse control. For another dog who's jumpy, mouthy, one of the goals that I believe was also listed was um, r- the goal was to be able to remove from the kennel without biting on a staff member's clothing or without leash grabbing. So when we're thinking about the goals, we're thinking about what is the actual thing we want the dog to do. because when we are working with our teams who may not necessarily have the whole behavior repertoire and experience of an actual dog trainer, we want to be really clear about what it is that we're asking them to try to help us with. So ideally, the dog is able to get excited without over arousal, um, and accepts playing and petting without jumping, mouthing, or grabbing clothes. So that was the goal for Julius and for the staff. So we also had a designated in-kennel enrichment plan, which you can see was also listed in Shelter Love. And then what we did is we created handling plans for these dogs because it's not necessarily about taking them out of a kennel, working on something for 30 minutes and going back. We need to have everybody consistently helping this dog by keeping our handling similar enough that the dog has more predictability, which creates a lot more safety for both the dog and the person. And it also allows the dog to begin forming an association with a level of expectancy. Oftentimes, I feel like a lot of these dogs who exhibit the high arousal type behaviors in shelters is often because they are, their whole day is filled with loud noises, things moving around, overexcitement, some fear, and it's all mixed in together. And for some reason, instead of these dogs becoming reclusive and fearful, they have the propensity to do that in the complete opposite spectrum. And that is where we get some of those behaviors. I think personally in my career, some of the most sensitive dogs I have worked with are actually the ones who are the most obtuse to have to handle in the shelter. So for him, we had a slip lead to move because getting a harness on him in the kennel, he would start baying and it would the whole rest of the kennel would get crazy. So all we did was we created everybody has to use a slip lead to move him from the backside of the kennel, remove him from the kennel, and go to a quieter location to then put the harness on. And then they used a peanut butter spoon to slip lead and walk from the kennel. And that was working on teaching him to move out of the kennel without jumping and grabbing, and then getting that harness put on in a separate area. So the equipment required for him would have been, so we're telling the staff here exactly what equipment we're asking them to utilize, keeping it nice and consistent between staff members. So high value food, in this case, they would put a snuffle mat or food maze placed in the yard prior to taking him out of the kennel. And let's see, what else did they have in here? Back out of the door to prevent any door dashing and lock it. He was definitely a fun handful of a dog. So yeah, so he had a plan on what equipment staff should be prepared for because they take him out. And then his actual treatment plan, which is the actual quote unquote behavior modification. For this team, we kept really simple. Instead of trying to ask them to do leave it or any other of those typical impulse control type activities you would normally see dog trainers using, we started with just red light, green light. So it would start with play or petting and then stop and asking him to sit and looking for eye contact and repeating gradually and increasing that level of stimulation. And then the part that I find to be really helpful for staff, especially those who are not coming from or who don't have a long time experience with working with dogs or a variety of dogs or a behavior background, is what to do when the dog does the behavior we're trying to extinguish. So we want to make sure we include that section in whatever plan we're utilizing for them. And so if the dog jumps, just stand still and turn around, then ask for an easier behavior. And you can also use the find it game to redirect if needed. So that's an example of a behavior plan that is more so a handling plan than anything else. However, if all of the staff members are utilizing this plan and they're starting to learn that these plans, these three types of plans, are relatively similar. We've got our fearfuls. Let me see if I can find. No, that's another jumpy mouthy one, you guys. I work with a lot of a lot of the jumpy mouthies are the ones that come in. Let me see if I can find a fear. Here we go. So like I said, we have usually about three of these plans. That's kind of where I start. So shy, fearful, jumpy, mouthy, and then reactive. So this is a plan for Rosie, and I get each of these templates has some multiple choices, so you can vary for the specific needs of the dog. But what's nice is that because there's maybe only 2 to 3 choices per thing, as the staff begins to utilize these plans, they become familiar with these specific routines and they're again practicing the timing and the reinforcement. So the biggest thing is just getting your whole team ready to start carrying treats on them all the time. Because realistically, in a shelter environment, if we're constantly rewarding the behaviors we do like, and we're teaching the staff how to use the treats in a way that is not going to increase arousal, we're going to get better behaved dogs and dogs feeling safer because they're knowing that they're going to get reinforced for better behavior. So for Rosie, her goal was decreasing fear of novel people. And so we were practicing classical conditioning at all opportunities around people. So her kennel management plan included having a drive-by treat bucket secured to the front, and every time a person walked by, they would toss a treat in. The bucket was to be filled every morning with high-value food and emptied at the end of the day. You know, we don't want mice or food to go bad. Her handling plan was a fear-free and low-stress handling. So we talked about utilizing consent checks and evaluating the dog's body language frequently when doing harnessing and leashing. Her equipment required a martingale collar, right? She's a fearful dog. We want to make sure she doesn't back out of a harness or back out of anything. And the instructions help the staff know that they should probably check that collar occasionally to make sure it's still fitted properly. And then her actual B mod, right, is very simple. We're going to do treat retreat. We're going to toss a treat in front of the dog, and then when a dog is comfortable eating at that distance, you place the treats further and closer, depending on the context, and allowing that dog to use their choice and agency to decide when to approach you or not, and what to do when. So if she shuts down, uh, and stops engaging, allow the dog to look around and feel safe. If the dog continues to shut down, maybe move to a quieter location, remove yourself from the space, and you can get up and just move away and see if the dog follows you. So these instructions, again, are helping staff understand specifically what to do when the dog does the behavior that we're trying to work on, and we don't want the dog to repeat. So those simple behavior modification plans that actually just really start out as consistent handling plans can be really helpful. And so the way that I have found to be the most effective for especially especially with the younger employees is that they do like to get their hands on things and watch and observe in short snippets. And even myself, as somebody who has been training private clients for years and has worked with many people who have dogs with all sorts of challenges, they can watch something all day. They can watch on a computer screen. They can watch you do it. But unless you're handing that leash off to them and allowing them to try it and experience it themselves, they're never going to really figure out how to use the techniques and the functions. So one thing that you can do is set up a series of these of like, hey, today we're going to learn some behavior modification for how to work with a jumpy mouthy dog. Or it might depend on what population of dogs you have. So it might be every third Friday of the month, or maybe if you have a big staff and not everybody's going to be there, you can split it like every second Tuesday and every third Friday, so you're kind of getting everybody in. Setting aside an hour to pull a dog out of a kennel and just have, or two or three, just having everybody work with those dogs on those things. So when we're thinking about fearful dogs, threes work. I don't know why, but even from when I was managing like 30 employees. It's just if you give people like three simple things to do, that seems to stick rather than trying to teach a whole wide spectrum. So for fearful dogs, it's going to maybe be treat retreat. We might do how to walk. If for really fearful dogs who don't have experience on a leash, it might be loose leash walking in a sense that we're actually teaching the dog how to walk on a leash in proximity to a person. And then the third one is probably just going to be a classical conditioning. So that could be like a hand target, so teaching an animal to approach you if they're comfortable enough to do that, and then generalizing that to maybe having a second person come in and practice hand targeting, but keeping it to like that 3 exercises at the most for that individual dog. Jumpy mouthy, we might be looking at providing that dog with extra enrichment, a structured kind of handling plan like Julius, where instead of trying to fiddle around with the harness in the kennel while everything's really loud, we're just quickly moving him to a different area and then practicing slow harnessing there. And so we're going to be working on, basically just decreasing arousal and how we can do that. We're going to be working on general impulse control. So, like that red light, green light. If you have more advanced staff, you could do something like tug with rules or fetch with rules or something to that nature. But again, we're keeping the exercises pretty simple as if you'd want an adopter to do those. And then for our reactive dogs, what what I've actually found to be really helpful in the shelter setting, if you're not familiar with Leslie McDevitt's pattern games, instead of saying, hey, we're going to work on loose leash walking, we're maybe going to practice the 1, 2, 3 game, which basically involves teaching the dog that if they're walking next to you, the on the Q3, they get a treat. So you teach them how to count. Basically, is like when you or cue, if you say one, they turn their head because they're expecting the two and then the three. And instead of create trying to teach someone how to just keep an eye on the dog and reinforce them for walking in a heel position and to do this and to do that. If you just teach them to start in a room with the dog and practice 1, 2, 3, treat, 1, 2, 3, treat, 1, 2, 3, treat, then you start walking outside and you say 1, 2, 3, and the dog turns around and you give them a treat. What you find is the dog just falls into that heel position. The pattern creates the predictability, which the dogs really love. So she has a couple different pattern games, and I found them to be very effective. And the other thing we might do, so it might be the 1, 2, 3 game, engage, disengage, and we might work on settle and relax on a mat. Or, that might actually be for your jumpy Malby friend, but I think you get what I'm saying. So you really starting with just 3 exercises per condition that a dog is suffering from, or behavior challenge that dog is experiencing, and keeping that really easy. So back to the tracking of the progress now, because that's going to be having those consistent standard operating procedures or standard operating handling and training tasks for each of these individual groups of behaviors. Now, what we're going to want to do is make sure that we're getting the data from the staff. And again, when we have, especially many of our kennel techs and animal care folks are generally younger. It's maybe an entry level job for them, or maybe we have somebody who's retired and came in because they are like, I want to work with dogs now part time or whatever it is. That typically that level, entry level role, those folks don't have that much experience. So now that we are asking them to create documentation, and moving away from maybe some of those observational sheets, it can be a little bit more challenging because you may end up with like 3 paragraphs of information and only maybe 3 sentences of it once you, as somebody more seasoned, look through it, are actively relevant. So what I've done is create uh, now I gotta find this one. It's kind of I know it's gonna look so rudimentary because it's really not that deep, I suppose. Is this it? That's not it. It's this one. Is it? Am I sharing the? I'm not even sharing the right thing. Oh, it's seeing my whole screen. That's why. Okay. I hope you guys can see that. Okay. So yeah, so this would be a template for conducting a training session or, so if this is going to be maybe that 10 a.m. activity plan, or it's going to be something that is a specific request, like we're working on treat retreat, or maybe we're working on that nose work skill. All you're going to do is create this very easy template is your employee name or volunteer name, the date that it's done, the behaviors that are being worked on, and then we want to talk about what type of tools and reinforcement strategies we use. So treats, harnesses, collars, they could put in hot dogs and cheese, etc. What time of day it was, the location of where this session happened or this time spent together happened. We want to also have an idea as somebody from a bird's eye view of any distractions that might have been going on. Was there a man in a work truck who pulled up in the middle of your session? Was there traffic going by on the road? Was that distracting for the dog? Was it not? Which is good information to also have. Any other notes? And then you can ignore that one because that was for dog notes, and that would probably be put into a playgroup note. But you can basically take this very simple thing and ask them to just work out, 1 to 2 sentences, and then enter it into Shelter Love in their profile. And then as a manager, you can go in at a later point in time and just read through the notes. And if you have a good computer system or software system, you can actually just run a report. Like at the end of the week, if you have a large population of dogs, you can just run one whole report that can give you a printout of that dog's entire week. And you can look at those FAS scores. You can look at, any of these notes. And that's going to really help you with building out something that is going to give you a bird's eye view of how the animals are doing without having to stop during your day and go check on people or ask questions. It will also help your team know that, hey, all this documentation is in there. So when our leadership team are talking about dogs, my input is also in here. So I think that that can be really, really beneficial for a lot of our volunteers and staff members who may not always feel like their input or voices are being heard. From what in my experience, when there's transparency and there's really nice structured systems in place, it makes people feel a lot safer. And, you can have more candid conversations and they can become less emotional when you have some objective information to discuss and go over in front of you versus just having that conversation back and forth. So, using templates, utilizing programs that help you make creating the plans more efficient, and then making sure that you are only introducing things to your staff at a slow pace and allowing them to build up the skills before introducing more complex plans is going to be really helpful. One of the ways that you can do that is you can tier your staff along with the dog colors, so or handling levels, or whatever your shelter system may use. I've been to shelters that don't have systems. I highly encourage it because you can then train your staff right along. So maybe we have 4 different colors, but the dogs that are in like that fourth color category, the more difficult dogs, maybe only staff members who have been trained on how to do or have gained a skill set to have a higher level of behavior modification skills or training skills or handling skills are handling those specific dogs. I will say with a caveat, because I think that's really important, is when you have staff members who are specifically or volunteers who are handling the dogs who are having more challenges in the shelter. And, I'm being a little broad because each shelter has their own philosophies on at what point we may be discussing whether this dog is truly adoptable or not. But if you have staff members who are or volunteers consistently working with dogs who are marginal, we need to make sure we're having discussions and we're checking in with those folks pretty continuously because if we don't, what we may end up seeing is a lot of compassion fatigue with folks who are in those roles. And those folks need, not that everybody doesn't need support, but the people who are spending more time with those dogs who are having a difficult time, they become very emotionally attached to those dogs because anytime you spend time with an animal, whether they're like the worst dog in the world or not, you're still gonna fall in love with them because we're all here because we love dogs. And I will say I hate you, but it's in like the most I love you so much. I want to squeeze you to death because you're so, you know. Like, I don't think I've ever met a dog I actually didn't like, because not all dogs are aggressive all the time. And so it can be really easy to fall in love with these animals and might not always have the best outcome. So if we're tiering systems in that way, in which we do have a subsect of people dealing with some of our most intense population of animals, those folks need check-ins more often if you're a manager. So again, just to kind of recap where I started talking about this is that you need to start easy if you're gonna obtain longevity, and it would make sense for you to have a plan and a goal when you're working on creating your program or enhancing your program of where you want to be, but expect that goal to happen on the timeline that your shelter can adhere to it. So, it's gonna depend heavily on how engaged your staff members are or how engaged your volunteers are. how much support you have from the leadership team, to start implementing some of these structural changes to make sure that we are allowing people to learn along the way instead of, asking them to take some online courses and then dive straight in. And again, I've found that in shelters, our time is relatively strapped often. So if we are also saying you need to continue doing all of your job and then also do this on top of it, they're gonna, where is the time in the day and why are you asking me to do more things without giving me a raise, right? So, um, we need to make sure that when we're looking at starting slow and implementing something as simple as let's just all start tracking our daily observations of dogs when we take them out of the kennel for a walk and circle things. And then we start having conversations about, oh, I noticed that you said that this dog's behavior was a little higher on the FAS. Like, what was going on? And you can have those conversations where you can start talking about objective language and then maybe throw in a course on fear free and then throw in a course on body language, right? And then you build off of that. And then again, if we're starting to say, hey, we're all going to work on taking a dog out of a kennel with a slip lead and then moving into Jerry's office to put a harness on. Here's how we do that. And we do that as a team together and we work through how to do it. So now everybody's kind of learning a task along the way. And that's going to be pretty effective. You want to make sure you steer mostly away from being like, oh, well, I taught this person, so then they can go teach that person, so they can go teach that person. Because by the time you get to the fifth or sixth person, it looks so different from what you initially intended. So, a way to streamline that, again, technology, is you can record a video of maybe you doing it the way you want it done. Maybe it's a minute and a half video. You put it onto YouTube as an unlisted video so nobody can find it unless they have the link. And then when you're training, you can say, here, watch this video. And then you can say, okay, go get Roger out of his kennel and just show me what you just did in that video. And you watch them do it. And then you can say, okay, now go get um, Cutie out of that kennel and then have them practice it with three or four dogs and then send them on their way. So you can really utilize YouTube videos quite a bit in shelters. And for dogs who have very specific plans, one of the best ways that you can get everybody doing it at the same time is again, have somebody take the dog out of the kennel the exact way you want it done, put it on YouTube, get a QR code, and put it on the front of the kennel and says, anybody who takes this dog out must watch this video. So, you can start with doing certain things like that that can also help getting everybody on the same page. And then, yeah, like I said, the next part of creating kind of this program and legacy is figuring out what groups of dogs or what types of dogs are giving your staff the most challenge. And I would start with that one. So if it's jumpy, mouthy dogs, I would just start with let's come up with 3 protocols for jumpy, mouthy dogs and all get on the same page about that. And then figure out which of the 3 protocols work for each individual dog. And then you can backtrack to like shy and fearfuls, then you can maybe come back to reactive dogs. But people need things in bits and pieces, and if you kind of throw the book at the wall, they're just it's going to be too much. So generally when I have seen this implemented, it takes about 6 to 8 months to really get things moving. And then by year 2, everybody who's onboarding is now learning all of those skills as they come on board. And now you have more people on board who are proficient in those skills. Then you can do a little bit more of trusting staff to kind of teach newer staff coming in. But the all of that working together is going to be really helpful for you guys. So yeah, and then the next thing I always advocate for is having daily morning check-ins with your team because it helps also validate any concerns or observations. Maybe somebody forgot to write something down, whatever. So that's a really good way to check in with the staff and remind them and say, hey, remember, we're practicing this new protocol today. Make sure that you have your treats on you. As a manager for the first 6 or 7 months, you might be repeating the same thing like every other morning, but that's part of the course. And just get used to doing it. And people learn by that repetition as well. So if anybody has any questions, I know I always do this. I feel like I throw a lot at you, but I have a few minutes. If anybody has any questions or wants to talk about their team, you can go ahead and raise your hand or put something in the chat. That works as well. I'll just stop talking for a second. All right, so no questions. So, what I would like to say is that I do have some of these templates. So if you guys want to shoot me an email, if you have a template you're currently using and want me to review it, I'm always open to looking at that stuff as well. I am in the process of getting my life together to run a second playgroup mentorship, and that is likely going to be in September, though the Aggression in Dogs conference is coming up at the end of the month, and I'd have to skip a week, so I'm not sure if I want to do that or wait till October. I do have some really cool courses that are coming up on the 5 domains in animal welfare and its applicability in the shelter environment, and then transitioning from the thinking of the 5 domains into Dr. Karen Griffin's framework of animal needs and its applicability to the shelter environment. That's going to be a series that'll come out. There's going to be 6 videos total, and I think that's going to be really helpful for those who are working in a shelter and some of the considerations. The audience is actually targeted for shelter staff. So we are working on creating this video series in a format that is under 40 minutes, that can be put on a TV during lunchtime so that it's like a lunch and learn format. So I hope that that's something that you might consider for some of your staff, is just how they can cater to dogs' needs during those minute daily interactions. And then, yeah, I've got a lot more cool stuff coming up soon. So I hope you'll, keep an eye on the website and emails coming out. And I hope that you all have a wonderful Thursday. And I think that's it. So thanks for joining today. Really, this is a topic I could probably go on about for eons. So if you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.